Didn't really have a video planned for like the first video of this month, so I was racking my brain trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I figured I would do a vlog, but I didn't necessarily have like any fun story. And then I started thinking about the fact that like I've probably been doing vlogs wrong. Like vlogs aren't you turn the camera on just when you have something interesting to say. Like rehearsed or practiced in your brain about things you want to say. Um, and I was thinking about like the pandemic and the last 2 to 3 years and how so much stuff wasn't allowed to happen, but a bunch of other stuff unannounced happened. Like a bunch of people have lost loved ones, they've lost friends, and I think the last 2 to 3 years have been really difficult for people because if you weren't the kind of person before the pandemic who would sit back and meditate on your life, I mean, the pandemic sort of forced introspection on everyone, which, like, if you're not used to thinking that way, it can be a dangerous place for people to be. I was really happy that a lot of people seem to have pulled themselves together and kept doing what they wanted to do, especially like artists. And I'm not necessarily talking about like Hollywood. Wow, I'm so glad. How courageous of them to go into their multi-million-dollar studio and not that sort of stuff. Just regular people who were making things prior to the pandemic who kept making stuff, whether it's music or writing, whatever it was. I was just super happy that not everything creative stopped. It obviously delayed a lot of things. Over the past 2 to 3 years, lots has happened. Um, some good, some bad. Which, I mean, to be fair, that was life before the pandemic, so that's nothing new. So prior to the pandemic, people had these rhythms and like routines, let's say, and the pandemic obviously put an axe to that. And so somewhere within quarantine, people sort of developed new rhythms and new routines. And I say routine, but at some point in time, routines become ritual. And maybe taking a more nuanced approach to that word, it's like, it's an elevated thing. It means like, your week didn't feel complete unless you got to do that thing. Like, that's no longer routine. That's like ritual. It's something that you have endowed with a certain amount of importance. And I, at least, developed kind of my own quarantine or pandemic rituals that I enjoyed doing after a while. At first, it was out of necessity, right? It was, I can't do the things that I wanted to do before. So now I need to invent new ways of doing the things I wanted to do, but in a world that is shut down and layers of complexity to everything, to gatherings and trips and whatever. And now I'm sort of on the opposite end of that pendulum swing, and maybe some of you are with me on this, where you're trying to get back into the rhythms that you had before, and now it's difficult, because you sort of have grown to love your pandemic rituals. So I'm trying to like balance those out, trying to find, a happy medium there. Had to move. Someone was doing a driving practice, and I did not want to be in the way, or to have the same car circle me 17 times. I don't know why this always happens whenever I try to do a vlog. It always happens. I remember talking with some of my siblings, and I was basically saying, because of the times we were living in, back in 2020, I told them the most amazing people are going to come out on the other side of this. This is as extraordinary as people were making it sound, if it's as peculiar and strange and extraordinary and unprecedented. Gosh, I started to really hate some of those words that people kept using. Unprecedented. I started to hate that word. I think collectively, what a lot of people my age, and maybe older as well, sort of, it dawned on them after a while that, wow, nothing like this has ever happened before exactly this way. And I think some people took that in the direction of, wow, this isn't fair, which I totally get that reaction. And the people I'm envious of are the people who saw the pandemic as an opportunity. Um, Whether it was projects that they were working on, or organization of their house, or, you know, whatever it may have been for each person. It'll be different. But the people who like were really trying to make the most of it, I have a lot of respect for those people, because it took a while before that more positive mindset set in, at least for me. I don't know about for you guys. But I mean, looking back, like, I went to a live podcast show last night with Zach, and masks were not required. Now, this isn't a mask, unmask thing. It just means that, like, you didn't have to, because the worst of the spikes, at least for the moment, knock on wood, are behind us. Like, most people have either been vaccinated or have had COVID, or a combination of both. And it's sort of weird to have that specific chapter of the book closed. My grandma got really sick, and so she was moved into assisted living, and she and my grandfather were separated for quite a while. And essentially, the money situation grew into, we want to have them together at assisted living because they can't live in their own house. And in order to make it work financially, their house had to be sold in order to cover the cost of having them living at the assisted living. And again, this was still pandemic time. And so, like, the process of my mom and her siblings figuring out what to do with items in the house. I mean, I helped clear their house out, and it was gut-wrenching for me, and I didn't even live there at any point in my life. That one was 2021, and that one was rough. 2020 was worse, mainly because it felt like the entire year problems just kept sort of compacting on each other, if that makes sense, where, like, you hadn't even caught your breath from one problem before the next thing was coming along. Whether it was familial problems, relational problems, like health issues, had a lot of that too in 2021. And then, of course, like, that's all happening with the backdrop of global pandemic happening. This is the thing that's so tricky, right? It's like, I don't want to complain because I feel like I shouldn't, for the sake of those who had it worse or have it worse, right? But it's almost like that thing has to go somewhere, right? It's like you need some sort of an outlet to voice that tension and that struggle. But you don't want to do it in such a way that makes it all about you, or tries to turn it into some sort of a suffering competition, because obviously there are people who have it so much worse. I think part of the reason why the pandemic was so tough, like I said before, was because of all the problems. because that wound never got a chance to be healed before there's just more and more added to it. You never really got a chance to process the initial thing, right? And so maybe this is just me. I don't know if this is a collective thing at all. Now that the pandemic has started to kind of subside, I'm finally able to sift back through the past 2 to 3 years and re-examine the stuff that happened during that time that I wasn't able to process before because there was just too much going on. One positive thing, not the only positive thing, but one positive thing that came out of the pandemic is I had a lot more time to work on poetry. And so I have probably close to 100 new poems locked and loaded that I'm going to start making digital. They're all in, scrap pieces of paper and stuff. Um, if you don't like journal or write poetry, I would highly recommend it. Anybody can do it, believe it or not. Poetry isn't all about fancy words and rhyming. It's about expressing. Um, and I think that's something that a lot of people need right now. Or journaling too. Journaling's great as well. Um, it is really cool being able to flip back through my journal and read stuff before the pandemic. That's one really weird thing I will say is now, right now, when a new podcast will be suggested to me, and I'm one of those people, I have to go back to episode 1 of everything. Listen all the way through. What's really creepy and weird is when you start a new podcast, you go all the way to the first episode, and it's like the first episode airs in like 2017. And then you listen through, and then you hit 2019. And as an audience listening, we know what happens in 2020, but to hear the people in the podcast talk about the future, the next year, their tours, it's Twilight Zone-ish. It's so weird to hear people talk glowingly about 2020 before the world ended. It's so weird. So strange. But I just thought I would make a vlog talking about something other than like a funny story that I've told a million times that people have heard, and I just want to sort of update people on like the last couple years, which this wasn't really an in-depth like overview. It was just sort of a flyover. Yeah, I'm looking forward to things again, which it's been a while since I've been able to say that. So the lady who cut my hair today told me that my hair color was 1 in a million, and that felt pretty good.